Why hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about My Hero Academia chapter 204, which I personally really enjoyed reading because it gave us some more insight on the quirk of Iida's, which is really interesting. And also, of course, we got a lot of stuff regarding Todoroki, which is mostly gonna take place next chapter, but we also got some small details on some other characters like Ojiro versus the spinny guy. I can never remember his name, but you know who I mean, the guy whose body part can start spinning continually. We also had some Tetsutetsu, which is of course related to the whole Todoroki thing that I mentioned, but I'm mostly gonna talk, or at least firstly gonna talk Iida. You know, I can never really know for certain how long I'm gonna end up talking about each thing, but I imagine Iida is gonna be the center of this video. And the reason is because I've been waiting for Iida to get some really good stuff happening to him ever since the Stain arc, because that's really the last time Iida had some good stuff going for him. Ever since that arc, nothing interesting or relevant has really been going on with Iida that we really cared about. Like we had this one time when he was trying to prevent Deku and everyone from rescuing Bakugo by punching Deku. But that wasn't really something that made us think Iida was a better character than he was before, because that was just a punch. He was simply trying to prevent them from going. But right now we're actually getting a lot more insight on Iida's quirk, because what we learned in this chapter is that Iida's quirk can be tuned, which is being done in a very interesting way. That's really the only way I can express it, because he has to effectively remove this muffler that he has on his legs, I guess, and over time that muffler has to be growing out on its own, and it will adapt to an entirely new physique of Iida's, and his quirk will automatically become stronger. It will be, you know, more effective. He'll be able to use it longer. It will be a lot faster, a lot stronger than we've ever seen it. And in this chapter we got the first glimpse of it. We got to see the Reciprocal Turbo in action, which is stated to be quicker than Gran Torino. Now that is a feat, my friends, because so far, I mean, we may have seen some characters that are faster than Gran Torino, All Might being one of them, of course, because he was pretty fucking fast. Gran Torino, though, was still pretty fucking fast. And Iida is now basically stated to be faster than him while Reciprocal Turbo is active. So not all the time. If he's using Reciprocal Burst, you're not really gonna see him being quicker than Gran Torino, but you are gonna see that while Reciprocal Turbo is active. However, there's of course a drawback to this technique as well, which is that he has no fucking control. He has no control whatsoever at this point when using it, because I imagine this is probably the first time he's actually using it, at least in combat. So he has to really adapt and get used to this and eventually learn how to control it, how to tame this new technique of his. It is a technique that Iida's family has had in the family for a long time, because his brother mentioned in the flashback that of course it's something that has existed ever since their grandfather was a hero. So this quirk obviously dates back quite a bit, and Iida is simply a new generation using this quirk. Same generation as his brother technically, but he's a lot younger than his brother, so you're really gonna see that his brother knows a lot more than he does, of course. And you know, Iida's family seem to be discussing this in the flashback, including his mother, so you can really see that the entire family is really on board with how this quirk functions and how it is passed down in his family, which I found to be quite interesting. It's not really something that I expected to see this chapter. I did not think we were gonna see a quirk which could be tampered with and improved upon in such a way. I really didn't think that was something we were going to be seeing. But it kind of makes sense in a way because of the fact that his legs, well, part of his legs are technically engines. So of course, if you had really thought about it, it would not have been as much of a surprise, I guess. But me personally, I just didn't think of it that much. You know, I typically don't really want to overthink the quirk system, simply because at the end of the day, you know, a power system usually is quite simple. Not necessarily boring, but at least somewhat simple, so that it is easier to grasp and easier to understand, easier to follow, and so on and so forth. But every quirk seems to be its own system in a way, given that Iida's quirk, the engine legs if you will, can be tampered with much like you would tamper with mechanics. So I'm really curious if this can apply to other quirks as well, where you can, depending on the quirk of course, somehow tamper with it and it will be able to be improved upon naturally by regrowing certain parts, by actually removing, you know, in this case the muffler that was a lot worse than the one that would potentially grow out if he didn't use the muffler for a while. So another thing that I want to talk about quite briefly is Ojiro versus the spinny guy. I'm just gonna call him that because it makes it easier and you probably understand who I'm referring to. And that is of course because Ojiro showed that he, unlike previously, he's actually being shown, you know, how to fight. He's shown that he can keep up with some opponents on screen instead of just, you know, seeing the aftermath that he's fine or whatever. You know, we're actually seeing that he's fighting this guy, not necessarily winning, but he is definitely keeping his own ground, even if that is by defending himself and parrying every attack rather than actually being on the offense. You know, he's doing something. It is a rather bad matchup he's in, I will be honest. But as we saw in the chapter, obviously, you know, it's not a one-on-one, this match is a team effort. So even if someone happens to find themselves against someone that isn't the perfect matchup, chances are you're gonna find that someone's gonna help you out and maybe they'll switch out with you so you can fight someone else or something like that. Doesn't always happen, but it is something you can probably expect. So I really do hope we get to see something else from Ojiro, even if not now, you know, just in the future. I'd really like to see him fight, you know, a proper fight instead of simply having a super blitzed fight where he simply loses or simply winning with barely any sort of fight going on, you know, just a punch win. Now, I mean, his fighting style is rather basic, as we know, because his quirk is simply having a tail. He has some mobility, and he probably could use that tail for something else as well. You know, like fighting, it's an extension of himself. But what I really hope we get to see is something else, a more extensive fight, be it through martial arts or whatever, you know. I just want to see this guy not be that guy who's just invisible. At this point, he's more invisible than Invisible Girl, and that is a problem in my opinion. Okay, moving on to Todoroki, because this is the last big thing that I really want to talk about, and it's probably going to be the last thing period I'm talking about in this review, simply because these are the things that we really got to see in this chapter. We got to see Iida, we got to see Todoroki, and we got to see a little brief encounter with Ojiro and the spinny guy. So Todoroki is what I'm very excited about for next week, because we got to see some brief backstory, or not really a backstory, it's more of Shoto's mental image of his father from the past. You know, it's like a ghost from the past in Todoroki's case, because he doesn't really want to bring his flames to the next level apparently, and that is what he's being forced to actually do in this match, because Tetsutetsu has shown that he is willing to take Todoroki's flames simply to push this match even further. He's not backing down simply because Todoroki is bringing out his flames. In the early match, we did have someone comment that they're really happy Todoroki wasn't using his flames, because if that happened, they'd be hopeless. However, Tetsutetsu is really showing us that that is not true, because he can take those flames due to his body being, you know, steel. He can turn his body into steel or iron, whatever it is, you know, causing these flames to have a much weaker effect on him, because, well, I guess they just do, because they absorb it in some different way from, you know, getting scorched as a normal human. And Todoroki is having serious problems finding out, how do I stop this guy, because the ice didn't work, because he can't peel off Tetsutetsu's skin simply because, you know, the steel skin is again a problem. It can hold up to that ice, and when it comes to the fire, it simply isn't having the effect Todoroki wanted it to, so he has to either increase the flames or come up with some other idea as to how to deal with the situation. And personally, I do think we're gonna see Todoroki amping up the flames to the next level. I'm not quite sure if it's gonna be blue flames like we've seen Endeavor and Dobby use, but I definitely think there's a possibility that we'll get a glimpse of that. But if that happens, I don't think it's gonna be anything extensive. It's gonna be really brief, because if it is extensive, that could seriously harm Tetsutetsu, and I just don't see that happening. I don't see Todoroki being crazy and just seriously injuring another school student. But if that happens, that'd be quite interesting to see, simply because his quirk is actually very powerful, but not invincible. So if he's willing to completely rid himself of the hatred he has for his father, the reason he's not really using the full power of endeavors, then we could seriously be seeing some crazy stuff next chapter in terms of power, or at least heat level, depending on what route Horikoshi decides to take, because at this point we simply don't know what this is gonna be. It's kind of like how we didn't really know what Reciprio Turbo was gonna be last week. So last week we got a tease at a new move or some new technique, and it looks like we're gonna have the same sort of deal this time around. We're gonna have to wait until next week to find out what it is that Todoroki is planning to do against Tetsutetsu, and whether it's gonna work, we don't know, but we can assume, we can hope, but that is about it. Anyway, I'm gonna end the review here, so I'd love to know what you guys think about this chapter of My Hero Academia. Did you like what we got from Iida, from Todoroki, and some of the other characters? I certainly did. Probably one of my favorite chapters of this arc, apart from the Shinso chapters, which I thought was a little bit better, but this is still quite good. And as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember everybody, Toga is waifu, Toga is laifu.